So hi, welcome to the sixth session at the Open Security Summit about the COVID Safe Paths app. And we're very privileged to have Adam Leon Smith here from the team development. And yeah, this is, I think, this is your sixth session, right? So you're definitely, being super involved, and it's really great. And one of the things I've said already several times, that I think this app represents a really great opportunity for the security community to be involved, because it's relevant, it's real, it's happening right now. There's lots of places where it actually should be used, realistically, actually even in the UK, given the latest announcements yesterday on how we're doing. And but also, they done all the right things. It's open source, it's released under Creative Commons and Apache 2, and they put privacy first. So what else would we ask for, right? So it's brilliant. So what we want to do here is, we want this session, we want to look at how can OWASP sort of resources and projects being used, or where would they fit within the current COVID Safe Paths environment, and sort of Adam, what I kind of maybe want to get from you is, what are the projects that you feel they click, right? Not necessarily that you go, oh, we're going to have resources to do it, but also with projects that, for example, or we can reach out to those project community and say, hey, do you want to be involved here, right? So there's a lot of great projects which I want to see if you are aware of, and I think OWASP has a really good set of things. In fact, we were just talking at the session before this one, which was about the OWASP, mapping their stuff into a secure pipeline, and how OWASP can be used by real world projects, and where does OWASP stuff fit in. And OWASP is basically a gigantic research community, right? It's kind of this community of security professionals. So, it helps a lot when you can provide some kind of guidance or like laser sharp focus. So I think what we got to start with, and in a second, is if you can actually, I think we talked about this, if you can show how you guys are using OWASP now, and especially on the testing side of things. And then actually I want to share a really cool project that Mario has been working on also, which is trying to create user stories and BDD cases and compliance as code for the Asvs. And then we can look at specific OWASP projects. So very quickly, this is the sixth session that we have. You can actually see the links there. So all the links are there for the sessions, and we got all the videos, and some of these things is actually probably worthwhile seeing, almost how the evolution and the thinking, and there's a lot of good information that was captured on these sessions. And the thing I really like about the project is they have this GitHub repo, which they put their security, privacy and security ideas and content. And one of the things they already have is this great page on security implementation, where they go to the details of how they're thinking about applying the OWASP principles. On the left, you got the mobile security testing guide. And then on the right, you got the Asvs, the application security standards, and it's about how that can be applied. And then Adam, can I ask you to now show us kind of how you're thinking of using them, especially that bit where how you're connecting that to tests?
Yes. So, do you see my screen?
No.
Try again.
Try now.
How about now? Great.
Yes,
okay. So you had our GitHub repo up on the screen there. So this is actually one of the pull requests, where I've submitted a pull request for some testing that was done around the safe places services and the authorization tokens that we've got in use. So as well as having the high level principles in there, what we're asking people to do is to take a bunch of them, to take sort of a blank document, take the OWASP documentation they're able to get, and to essentially write a test report. So within the top level principles, we've got things like pass and fail in there, and they should link through to a specific test report. Okay, not in this case. Let me pull it up directly.
Are you authenticated with the right account?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure what's going on there. I think that's just the formatting and the linkage not working. But we have here, so each of these OWASP principles, we're essentially going and documenting what we've done. Where we had the mobile principles, this was quite easy because they were really clear what we should do. With this one, the service authentication requirements, we had some difficulty doing one of the OWASP principles around 64-bit entropy. So I reached out for a bit of help on Twitter, and we've had various developers chiming in as well through the review of the pull request. So we're essentially writing exploratory test reports based on the OWASP principles and then submitting them in so that other people can have a review and see if they think we've missed anything. Over time, so if we're going to do these regularly, we could turn these into, as I think you were alluding to there, Dinis, BDD style tests, and then implement some kind of automated structure on top of them, which would be perfect where possible. But at the moment, we're just using this prose format to document the work we've done.
So what does the test actually looks like? Petra, it's really good that you're here because this is exactly the kind of stuff that I want us to be doing.
Yeah.
So how do you actually are doing the tests? Can you show me the test, or this is actually the description of the manual test?
This is the manual test report. We've got some automated stuff. So for instance, I did a test report today from, say, you're running Yarn audit. We've got reports in there from things like CommuniWeb that do things like code scanning, static code analysis. I looked at the framework that I think you're mentioning around BDD and mobile test automation. It looked really good. It covered one test that we've already done. So we haven't looked at implementing that yet, but that's definitely the sort of thing we want to work towards.
Yeah, so the other thing, I feel that we kind of need to convert this probably to like a JSON or YAML, because it has to kind of be machine parsable and it has to be machine updatable, right, from the test. Do you know what I mean? And even if the test is manual, right? So even if you actually end up having a manual test, i.e. a human actually doing it, to have that kind of almost database-driven mapping, right, of the test results allows you to, for example, create dashboards, programmatically create these tables, because you kind of were editing Markdown, right? And Markdown is not very good for that, right? I think, I kind of view like, so for example, I'll give you an example. Like, so we took in our Word documents, right, which are policies, and we convert them to Markdown. And I kind of did it that way because even that was an interesting paradigm shift for the team. But my end goal is not to end in Markdown. My end goal is end up in either a YAML file or a Jira ticket or basically some kind of JSON, so that you can start to build automation on top of it. Right?
A really interesting area I thought we could look at doing that in was the input validation. So as part of the threat modeling, we've looked at, for instance, the data exchange between the mobile device and the publicly exposed endpoints. So we've got
Can you pop your source code? Because actually I look at your source code and there's a couple of errors I would like if you have it on the Node app. Do you have the code there of the Node application?
Yep. One sec.
On Atom or something, or Electron. Yeah, the backend, yeah.
That's here. Yeah. Yeah,
so one of the patterns, right, that, for me is very important is if you go into the app, right, part of the application, and then the API, and then pick one of those guys, right, and then go to the controller, right? So open one of the controllers. So one of the things that, probably not that one, just one that something with more meat, right? Go to the other one, the case, because that doesn't jump anything else. Where are we? Yeah, so if you look at it, right? So one of the things that always worries me from an input validation point of view is that case ID, right, at the moment in time on that line 24 is potentially, right, 100 megabyte string, right? In fact, it comes from a body, right? So if it was a GET request, at least you'd be limited by 4K, right, or 5K. But that can be like, 10 megabytes of data, right? And in fact, if you think about it, the case ID you almost have a regex or a definition of what that is, right? And the problem is from a data validation point of view, if you look at on line 26, now you're just validating if it's valid or not, right? And then what you're doing is you're pushing downstream to fetch case points, all the validation, all the handling of it, right? So on line 28.
So the reason I picked access code is this one I picked this one because it's publicly exposed.
Yeah.
And this is the same thing, right?
So you got requests. Where is it? Where's the value?
No, this is
that you actually get.
access code.
No, that's just creating the access code. That's what I'm saying. So this doesn't take, and this is something that's important, right? So from a security point of view, it's important that you also start to capture, right? Almost the dangerous level or the toxicity of a function, right? So the function at the top at the moment, right, is, in probably a lot of ways, we haven't fully looked at it, but it's already a very low security profile because the data is generated inside of it. The only thing is you calling it, right? So, the only problem would be if that create has any kind of denial of service capability. So one interesting test to write from a security point of view is what happens if I call that create, 10,000 times, right? Like does he actually introduce any kind of, problem, or is this a very simple name generation, for example? So if that was, let's say, something that you actually running through a slow algorithm, right? That, you might want to do, you could have a problem, right? Because that could actually block, the thread, right? So that could actually start to introduce, a denial of service on the server, right? Which is ironically, right, one of the challenges that you have when you introduce strong cryptography. If you're not careful, you introduce a way to deny of service your backend.
Indeed.
Right? Because and actually Node, some of the new frameworks are better than the older ones, because the older ones would literally, you can just kill the whole thing, right? And because they will peg the processor, right? You make a couple of those and that's it, right? Like literally that machine is out of or that pod, right, is out of action for that period, right? So, but you see, so on input validation, so in fact, one of the questions that you need to be able to answer here is, what is your attack surface, right? Like, so you need to list everything that that your attack surface is. So all the URLs that exists on the application.
Okay, so the three that I'm most interested in, I'm just bringing up Postman now because I can show you the flow. So a semi-trusted contact tracer does a login to get a token.
Yeah.
And then creates a case. This is all authenticated, and they get this access code. That they then are going to give to someone over the phone. And then this URL here, the phone will then post this access code back. So this is obviously an important place that we check for that kind of input validation. And then there is a consent endpoint, which is doesn't do much interesting, but we should check it. And then there's this upload endpoint, which contains this rich data format that there's bound to be some processing on, some complex processing on. So those three endpoints, posting that access code and checking it's valid, posting the consent and uploading the data are probably our highest risk ones from a threat perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things we need to add is the abuse cases for those cases, right? For those endpoints. And now, and Petra, like, so this from a point of view of one of the things that we want to do from a development point of view. So I'm just using Petra because he's part of my team, right? And this is one of the things that I want us to do there too, is, do you have normal unit tests or not integration tests that invoke that workflow? So instead of using Postman, can you recreate that workflow with an integration test?
Yes. So, I mean, I can do something in Python, or I can do something in curl. We currently have some stuff written in Node itself.
Yeah, but do you already have a test? So that's Node, right? So we should be using Node, right? Do you actually have a test in the app that does that now?
Let me have a look. I think we did.
And the reason why that test is important is because that's the test that we can now write the abuse cases on top of it. So it's almost like we take your normal integration test and then we add the abuse case.
Yeah, so here's a node integration test. So this should be doing all of the necessary steps. So I can see some authentication stuff happening here.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've done in the past was to actually create an API, right, for testing. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that you actually have an API where you abstract this, you know, from a point of view of the code, because you can see, like, so you got the request, you make the code, etc. Like, for example, where you got your mouse there, right? Like, so that all of that bit there, right, in a way, so if you look at the results, all of that should be abstracted into a method that you just pass those two parameters, mm-hmm. where you just pass, in this case, the access code or even the case ID, right? So we can now write use cases on top of it. So we can write abuse cases where, so if you think about it, we want to call that function hundreds or thousands of times with different payloads on line 140. Because that's the case ID. Mm-hmm. So what I want to know is what happens with the backend if I put bad data into the case ID, right? And that's usually is the one where you want to go to town, because I will assume that, you know, within 5 or 6 requests for the access codes, we can confirm the behavior, right? Because the access code should just be, there's one request that's valid and the rest is not valid, right? Where for the case ID, you know, there could be tons of different places where, or different types of values, and that the users might be or not, right? So it depends on what happens on the back end. So these are the kind of tests that we need from a security point of view, right? Is that the one you got there? Yeah. Cool. But the other thing that I think is important is that this is not running against a live server, right? This is literally you marking it directly.
This is, these integration tests, our tests at the moment are running in Postman and then Newman in CI, where they're running against a live server.
No, say that again, sorry?
So so we're running these integration tests in Node, using mocks and things. They run at the code level. They run on the Docker containers and the live servers, all done using Postman and Newman, but we can extract it into something else.
Yeah, the problem with this is that, you know, Postman is good for this, but, you know, this is okay, one step removed from hard coded, but you want the same type of tests, right? Yeah. So you want to bring it to something like that. And I guess maybe the question for you is that if we're going to help to develop this, or, you know, because this is something I'm actually quite interested in helping and coding, right? Yeah. Do you want that to be in Python or Node? What's your preference?
Personally, I'd go for Python, because I'm a little more familiar with it, and I use it for a lot of testing.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, so you can see that what you want to have is a Python API that I can just go, you know, server, for example, or API backend. They go API login, API this, API register, and then or API new user. So then you programmatically create the, you know, the flows. So then the abuse case is just a multiple execution of those things. Mm-hmm. Right, and then what you have is you have an abstraction layer between your entire attack surface and a suite of APIs. And by the way, there's you know, there's no coincidence that this is also your user acceptance criteria testing, right? So, you know, and in fact, the way I tend to look this is there's almost 2 types of tests that happen side by side. There's the happy path, right, which is how do you expect the application to work. And that's very important because the happy path tell us how the app is supposed to work, right? And so that means that anything outside that behavior is now a potential security vulnerability. And then what you do is you take the happy path and then you apply abuse cases, right? And one of the biggest problems you have with application security is that you need state in order to put the payloads, and the state has to come from the happy path. So if you look at it, even on that example, in order for me to put a payload of legit, for example, bad locations, right, geolocation IDs, I actually have to first get a case number, then I have to log in, then I have to log in, get a case number, do this, accept, and then put the payload in, right? And that's okay, right? Because that's the behavior of the application. But from a fuzzing point of view, I need one call that gets me to that point, right, of payload deployment. Then I can run it. Or what you can do is you can then delegate at that moment in time to a tool like Zap or other tools, and they can go to town, right, in the fuzzing, because again, they have good fuzzing capabilities. But you give them almost the traffic, in the plate, so that they know how to get there.
So of the 3 calls we've talked about, you only need to have a valid access code to be able to do these calls. So we need to first of all do some kind of setup step where you get a valid access code from a contact tracer, and then we need to lay out the different steps. I like the idea of using BDD, because then you can separate out all your implementation messiness from what you're actually trying to do and what the threat actor is doing. So I quite like that BDD separation.
Yeah, but the only thing I would say is create an API that you can call natively from Python, and then if you want, put the BDD on top of it, because the BDD will force you to create an API. But I've also seen lots of cases where, there's moments where you need to program the thing, right? BDD is great because BDD is really good sometimes for the use case scenarios, right? And scenarios that is easy to describe. But once you go into some of the corner cases, or you want to really represent some parts of the application, writing in Python is so much cleaner, right? And the bottom line is that a good Python API is as readable as BDD, right? Because you can make it fluent, you can make it kind of, in that way. But then you have both options, because you can have the BDD kind of test cases that are written on top of that API that you can run.
So if I make some of that a little bit real on the screen.
Yeah.
So luckily that's been automatically generated for me.
Yeah.
I guess what we're looking at is, and I'm just sort of pseudo coding here, is we want to have a some kind of login call with a user and password, right?
Yeah. So the pseudo code would almost be, right, API equals COVID API, right? Something like that, right? So basically that's, so that would be COVID API, right? And then in this case, you can even, so I wouldn't simplify that more. I would just say log in as user, right? Because at this moment in time, I don't care about that, right? I just want to log in, and I can. So if you have, for example, multiple users, right? Yeah. So you don't need user and password, right? So you just need that thing, and then so you get an access code, right? Yep. Yeah, but you see, in this case, right? This is where I think from an API design, right? You can store that, right? Like you can actually store that within the state, so you don't need, right, the user and password. You don't need the token, right? Because that is implied. If you log in, you got a token.
Well, the only thing I was thinking about, the token, yes. The thing about the code, I was thinking we might want to manipulate that variable in the test as well. So, the code, yes, exactly.
So you want to get to the point where the only, my kind of view on this is the only field that we should be passing in is the actual field that we want to manipulate in that test. Apart from that, we refactor everything to that thing, right? So now you got the code, and then so that code is the code ID. So now you almost want to get a payload generator, right? That we can work on the side, right? And that gives you bazillions of payloads, right? And then you send it over, and then you start to see what happens with the application.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that, right?
Yeah, and then if you have a payload generator, you can go for each payload in payloads, right? Send the thing. And then you can generate small, large, massive payloads. You can have payloads with character zeros. You have payloads with all sorts of data, right? And then you can also define, what's your expected behavior for it, right? And in cases like this, I would also add timing to it, right? Because it's important that, you start to understand what our requests are going to take long and what our requests are going to be short.
Okay, so what do you mean at timing? How would I do that?
Well, so basically,
assert that the timing.
Yeah. So yes, correct. So if you think about it, so one of the tests you want to do here is you want to send a payload which is this big, that big, that big, that big, and that big, right? And you kind of, what you want is, you want, for example, the timing to grow linearly, right? Or you want to say, look, I expect, this thing not to last more than a second, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. And the first round you run it, you might go, okay, does it make sense to take that amount of time? And it could be because of network bandwidth, and it could be a bunch of other things. And this is very powerful in the future, because I've seen cases where you introduce a change that you think is quite benign, right? But then suddenly it starts to blow up in some tests that you're now sending lots of data, right?
Yeah.
And,
so
and what you're doing is, yeah.
I'm just adding a response object, so I could have like a tuple with the response code and the time to respond.
Yeah. Yes, really cool. Yeah, and then if you collect all the response codes, right, you can then do an analysis afterwards.
Yeah.
Right, because you can now, so there's 2 ways you can do it. You can run the whole thing and then do analysis at the end, or you can run it as you go, as you go along. And what you're really creating now here is you're going to create almost like an exploit database, right? An exploit, and there's some things, some references that you can use where there's a bunch of like payloads you can use. I think, let me just get the link. I haven't, where is it? There's a really cool project that has, let me see if I can find it. FuzzDB, that's it. Cool. So if you just, I'll just put this on a chat.
Cool.
So you can open it up. I'll guide you through it. So this is a really cool project that has, if you look there, I just pasted on the chat. If you want to open it up, I'll show you one that I used. Sure. So if you go to attack, and actually a good one, which already throws a bunch of stuff. I think is the which one is it? Can't remember. I think it might be the RSnake one. Yeah, if you look at the RSnake one, for example. Sorry. Go XSS on there. And then RSnake one. So the thing about this one, which is interesting, right, is that he's already throwing a whole bunch of weird characters on it, a whole bunch of weird stuff on it, right? And this is the kind of things that you expect everyone to fail, right?
Yeah.
But you'll be surprised, right? so basically, there's a couple of others which I'll dig for you, that even some of the SQL injections run, and they basically are good ones, because they they kind of throw in, right, a lot of good errors. And I've sometimes seen cases where you're kind of testing for SQL, but actually what you actually capture is a bunch of others, nasty things. So it's quite
I just threw
right?
I just threw that at the upload endpoint and got a 400 back.
Okay. Is what's supposed to happen?
Yeah, that's bad request. Maybe there's some cool stuff under the JSON piece, because that's a JSON endpoint.
Yeah, but I think on that one, you probably don't want to, you want to send them one at a time, right? And yeah, so that's a good one. So the JSON is actually a good one, because you could see all sorts of things on it, right? But the interesting case here, for example, is to understand why you get in the 400 and where you get in the 400, right? So in fact, that you can see that's already bad JSON. So in this particular case, I'm actually betting that you're not even hitting the application, right? You most likely, right, are hitting, are breaking it, at the gate. So that's why, what you need is you need to have these files, right? And then you need to put the payload in your pseudocode. Yeah, right. So if you look at your pseudocode, right, because you need to run that guy every time, right? So basically, you almost need that. If you look at FuzzDB, imagine that you got a FuzzDB API, right, and you basically go, exactly FuzzDB loads, right? And then you literally go for each payload, you put on, in your case, on payload there, right?
Yeah.
So, so you start to do for each JSON payload in payloads, you run the thing and you analyze it, and then you basically see what are the side effects, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, this is a really good performance and reliability, right? And resilience test, right? Even without security, this is a really nice way for you to check the performance test of the application, how resilient it is, how does it scale, how does it hold? Because one of the tests you have to create is you need to understand how much traffic it takes to bring your app down. So, right? And this is where I think it's interesting to then link this to an ASVS test. So one of your requirements, because this is the kind of things that you run as part of your pipeline, right? So then as part of your pipeline, you start to link this to those tests.
So let's go and have a look at what we've got there in the input validation section.
Yep.
So we've got verifying against HTTP parameter pollution, mass parameter assignment requests or unsafe parameter assignment, verifying all inputs is validated using positive validation, which we've seen from the source, it isn't. Verify that structured data is strongly typed and validates against a defined schema. So I think that's what essentially
that'll be one of them, yeah.
And verify that redirects and forwards only allow authorized whitelisted destinations. So and then we've got
that is one that, for example, this is the kind of test. So the last one is a good example where you would go, when you look at the functionality of the application, you go, do we have, right, any redirects on the application? There's the inputs that you have cause any redirection.
So one of the assertions we need to do is that we don't get any 301s or 302s.
Yep.
So let me, rather than doing this, let me do a validate results call. And we can have a little method that checks the results are good. So that helps me cover that off. Everything's JSON, so I can focus on this JSON payload, right? Data that we looked at.
For the test.
Well, all the three endpoints I'm worried about, they're all accepting JSON input. So I could cover off that JSON payload and enumerate over each endpoint. Is there any other payloads in there that might be worth looking at?
Yeah, so some of the payloads that which is some large payloads, right? Where you've got, big files or big kind of piece of data that that you should also be sending. But some of those you probably don't want to do here. You want to just generate it programmatically. But there's one. Let me take a look, because there's definitely some JavaScript injections that are worth doing, because not that one. Yeah, I need to go. Yeah, so that could be one of the tasks that I think we just need to do a little research, because I know where I've seen it before, but I'm not seeing it here. There's a suite of characters and also test strings that you want to do for Node.js applications that that can cause problems. But the main point here, right, is that once you got the infrastructure, right, it's easy to add the those things, because there's one. There's some resources I need to find to send you. So there is, once you got the infrastructure, right, then it's just a question of adding payloads, and it's just a question of adding, different variations of it, right? Like, so if you look at that ASVS, for example, the first one, HTTP pollution, that is actually about sending multiple encodings, right, of the file. But that is actually something that, like, from an OWASP community, it's easier to ask that question, right? It's easier to say, look, I got the infrastructure, how do I test this? So I think the important thing for us here is to create the infrastructure so that you can hook all sorts of specific tests into this. What you need to provide, almost from a development point of view, is expose the inner parts of the application in a way that is consumable, right, by tests or by automatic tools, right? So you want a case where you expose all the URLs should literally be an API that you can call, right? Because we need to confirm every single URL you have, right? So you might have a URL which is like a health check URL. Well, guess what? That needs to be checked. That might not be on your main one, but that kind of needs to be there. And one of the things you do, which is quite good, right? If you already got a JSON, in fact, one of the questions I had for you is, that JSON file that you have on the root of the source code, which contains the API, is that manually maintained? The file you got on the root.
You mean the Open API spec, I think?
Yes.
Is it under Nest.js here?
No, it was literally at the root of the main application. It was not a JSON file, it was something else. It was, where is it? It is that one, yeah. So that file, is that manually maintained?
I don't know, it certainly was, but I think it might have been automated now. It's certainly believed to be accurate.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that it's very important, and I think I'm pretty sure there's one of the ASVS that talks about public and private endpoints you test. It's very important to make sure that the code matches, for example, this, but also that you consume that YAML file as part of your tests, right? Because you can process it. Because in a way, that should be, it's something when we talk about the happy paths, right? That represents your happy path definition.
That's right.
So because that's what you expect.
To the degree that an Open API spec can, I think there's probably more value in laying it out like this in terms of.
Oh no, you have both. No. So what that Open API gives you is the public description of what you expect the behavior is. Mm-hmm. You still have to do this, right? But in fact, I would argue that this should be consuming that. So what I would do is I would wrap that YAML file into a series of Python methods that consume the YAML file. Right, but that also so the other thing that you want, and this is very important, right, is that, I'm pretty sure there's a test that asks for this, is that you want to make sure that every time your attack surface changes, there's a review for it. So the point here is every time your YAML file of OpenAPI changes, it means that you just changed the attack surface of the application. So, for example, you probably cannot review, or you or the security team cannot review every single commit that go into the application, but you probably should review every single commit that changes the attack surface.
That makes sense.
Right? And the way you do that is you use tests as your canaries for that. So what you do is you write a test that locks the attack surface. Do you know what I mean? And let me see if I can find an example, because I've done that before and it was pretty cool, right? So what you do is you write a test that confirms that, according to your understanding, the attack surface looks like this, right? And the power of that is that once the attack surface changes, you want a test to change, to break somewhere. And if it doesn't, you should be worried about, right?
Yeah.
Because it means that, something in the back end is actually not testing, that thing, right? So something in the back end is actually not checking if if that thing has changed. And that is a very important test, because what it does, it confirms to you that everything is still the way it's supposed to be. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. Actually, look, here's an example, right? This test here, I'm going to paste it on the chat. So if you look at that test there, right? Yeah. So in fact, it's not a bad example, right? So if you look at line 84. So if you go to line 84, and can you just make it a little bit bigger? So yeah, so if you look at that test, right? So this is actually runs against a live server, right? So you actually set up the controllers, right? Set up the thing, set up the redirects, and then add. So this is basically replicating a bit of how the routes is being set up, and then it has every single endpoint that is expected to exist on the application, right? And then you confirm that is actually there, right? So then you assert that they exist. So the key, for example, for this is to actually have a method that spits out your routes.
Cool.
So
which is important.
Just to throw something else into the mix here with routes. We never quite got to it, but I was looking. Team was looking at ways of pulling the registered routes from the actual Node app. So with the method of you hit you have a predefined list and you hit that, you will see what you expect to see. But if other components have registered other routes for whatever reason, you're blind to those.
Yes.
I was hoping, but we never found it, that there was a way within the actual app within Node that it would spit you out a definitive list of all the URLs that were registered, because that again then gives you a really nice set of data that you can cross-reference. It's like here's what the web server says my attack surface is. Here's what I expect it to be. Are they the same?
Yeah, but this is where I think. There's a moment where you have to be careful if you're fighting the frameworks, right? So some frameworks do a good job at it. Like, for example, Spring has freaking 5 or 6 major different versions that you can create routes, right? I remember Scala, right? You can even create routes dynamically, right? So you're almost impossible unless you use something like Scala Play and stuff like that. So, I think there's a line where you could say that your standard for creating routes is this, right? And if you support that standard from a kind of a static analysis or a mapping like this, you can enforce that reasonably easy, right? Because even if it's a manual code check, or even like a situation where, if you think about it, like even when you do a test, the reason why you will still do security tests on top of it is because they should be validating this, right? So if you look at it, for example, you have I'm in one of these cases where we actually will run Zap and a couple of other tools. And we actually were using that to confirm that there was no other routes in the application, right? But you can put a standard, right? So in fact, you can basically, and this is something that is easier to enforce, right? So if you guys agree that the only way you create controllers is a particular way, then actually what you prevent is a new developer joining the team that likes to do controls a different way, that goes and creates them, who creates a completely different way. And the reason why you want those security modules is because you already thought about security, you thought about all those processes. And Jonathan, like ideally, right, what you want is a situation where, and I wrote with this once, but then you need to go into static analysis more deeply, is that if you can then create an object model of the source code, you can also start to look for these other places that routes can be created. So you start to look for almost banned APIs, and you go, I should not be using that one or that one or that one.
That's why for that particular part, it was, okay, I have a way of identifying routes through source code, through static analysis, but I want to check with the canonical source, and the canonical source is Node. It is the process running. It is the URLs that are handled there. So it's really
then look at your
tests.
Logs. So then look, if you really want the canonical source, look at your logs. capture the
Yes.
logs, right?
Yeah.
Parse the logs, and your answer will
Well,
be there.
If if and only if Node is set up to log every new route that is registered. Because you won't necessarily hit it though. That's the thing. If you're just talking weblogs, it's just another aspect of or another another way of validating the data that you have.
Yeah, and I think it's important here to ask the question: are you preventing against normal mistakes, or are you preventing against abuse? Abuse scenarios, right? Are you preventing against a backdoor being put into the situation, or you going into a normal, what's it called? A developer using a different way of doing code that it becomes.
That depends on that depends on the discipline within your engineering team or your development team. If there is one way and you are very confident that that is the only way that routes are picked up, then that's great. If you have a variety of, so you have Express and you have, there was another one that's got built that's newer than Express now, and I can't remember what its name is, that declares routes in a different way. If you have multiple iterations or multiple histories, so circumstantial. It's just it is an approach that we were kicking around to pick up. It wasn't to pick up malicious backdoors. It was to pick up human mistakes.
Yeah, I know, and that's why if you do that, then you can go the route of creating a standard. And the good news, so Adam, the good news here is that you're still really early stages, right, on the full development of the app, right? So it's still not crazy future reach.
That's right.
That this is almost the perfect time to put those standards in, right? And that's why, look, my big requirement here would be, if you add a new route to the application, does something break, right? And if that doesn't happen, then you have a massive blind spot in your tests. Right. So if I add a route according to the current way that people do, so it means you will pass code reviews, you will pass assessments, you will do all that. But if no test breaks, means you're not keeping an eye, you're not controlling your attack surface. And the reason why this is so important is because these are the URLs that we're going to feed to the dynamic testing teams. In fact, even here, if you see this, even just that simple example, it was not trivial to even create a whole set of payloads that we created for the dynamic testing to be able to do the stuff. And in fact, if you look at some of these, like for example, the deletes and some of these functions, even the fuzzing, it has to be done in a sequence of events, or else you end up destroying half the database, right? Before you even got there. But it's very important because this is what gives you resilience, right? This is what gives you the confidence that the application works even at certain loads, but also that, if you look at, this one, look how many payloads, and each of these will have different payloads inside. So this is just almost the first top level, but it's the key one here is can I get a list of expected routes, right? So, and that one there. So that method there on line 122 is one of the most important methods, because that method is a method that, in fact, this one actually goes through the code, go to the objects register in Express. So, because actually, going to this, if I remember correctly, Jonathan, Express has that, right? So it's actually the routes object, right? Express does give you a full list of everything that's registered.
Yeah, there was a new framework that's post Express that did things in a different way that I bumped into
they always
a while ago, and I can't remember what its name is.
No, you always have to reverse engineer the framework. You always have to reverse engineer the framework. But okay, but Adam, so can you see that these are the kind of tests that we then want to link to your security controls? And in a way, the ASVS tests. And if we need to add a couple, we can add, right? That thing is a work in progress, right?
Yep.
But this is what you want. You want every kind of security question that we ask, we able to translate that into a test that then populates a kind of a JSON or a YAML object that can be populated during your test suite. That actually then gives you the results of where you are in your compliance. So it's the whole like compliance as code sort of concept that we're applying here.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think I need to look into whether that open API spec is generated programmatically, because if it is done like that through annotations and we have reasonable confidence that everything's going to be in there, that may be the best way to return it in lieu of finding a way to do it through Node.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? So it's an interesting example because there's kind of two modes of it, right? There is the mode of what's it called? You know, if it's not automatic generated, now you have the problem that it might be out of sync, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first problem, right? If it's not automatic generated, I almost guarantee you that eventually it's going to be out of sync with the source code. And the problem is that you end up having usually healthcare methods or new methods or experimental methods and all sorts of stuff that start to creep in that, you know, could potentially be source of vulnerabilities, right? So it's much better when that API list is your master list, because you can then consume from it, right? So that's an important thing. And some of these things is like sometimes worth spending the engineering effort to make that work, right? Because not only is it easy to maintain, it means that you can now, from a test suite point of view, you can kind of follow it like that.
Especially at the web services level. I mean, tests at that level
Yes.
are super low cost to maintain, super easy to get up and running with an engineering framework.
Correct. And then that'll be part of your CI. So even if you look at some of these tests, they are tests that you might only do at the last stage, or you know, you don't necessarily need to be on every single commit or every single thing. But some of these tests, you know, as your CI pipeline moves along, you start to introduce these more heavyweight tests that are testing for, you know, the payloads and the resilience and the security of these things. And this is why it's so important that you also create a dedicated environment for it. Do you guys do that already? Like as part of your CI pipeline, do you run the whole app?
We spin up the whole app in Docker containers that are linked together, so we can do some basic functional testing. And then we have a static environment that's redeployed to once those tests have passed. So there's always an endpoint we can go to that's got the latest code on. Yeah.
That is really cool, because that's what you want to reuse from a security point of view, right?
Yeah, and if we break it pen testing, we just commit some changes to the back end and it'll be rebuilt.
Exactly, right? That's the way it works, right? But, and also, like, I don't mention this, you know, in our back, right? When you do the security testing, right? The security testing should not be, let me find gap, you know, let me break the app. The security test should be, let me find blind spots in your understanding, right? That's what the test should be, right? The pen test should not be, you know, the pen test is finding stuff, some of these, like, you know, in the finding, then it's a problem, because, you know, there's lots of things that are broken. Like the pen test should be the one that goes, oh no, your Swagger doesn't, or your, you know, your open API doesn't match this, or you know, I can abuse this test case here and there and there. But it's very important that the pen test is not seen as, you know, something that's going to find a bunch of stuff. The pen test should almost be validating your current security expectations, right? Which is kind of why, like, the sooner you do this, because the other interesting concept that I want to kind of see if I can explain it correctly is that your current security vulnerabilities or gaps are features of your application, right? So you need to start writing tests that confirm those features, because that's the behavior that you have today. Does that make sense?
That's right. Yes, yes.
And what that means, it means that you start to also have a success criteria for what it means when you want to go to the next level of security, right? So for example, at the moment, you're not doing a number of data validation or validation against a common schema, right? Against some of those endpoints, right? Or some of those parameters. So that's a feature that you have today of the application, which sometimes you can even use it from a developer, right? Hey, cool, I can just send all types of data, right? You know, I can reuse this on different ways. So it's very important that you start to have tests that capture those exceptions. And today they are passing tests because that's the behavior of the application. So then as you lock down the app, what you want to see is you want to break a test and then you fix the test to represent the new behavior, right? And that is a really powerful workflow. So you know, I cannot explain how powerful it is when you do code reviews by looking at the delta of the tests that had to be changed. Mm-hmm. So I've done code reviews just by looking at the test change, I can tell you if I'm comfortable that the change was done correctly, or if they're not understanding the scope of the problem, right?
Yeah, especially if those tests cover non-functional aspects as well as just functional ones, definitely. Yeah.
Correct. Yes. And that's very important, because a lot of times what we're talking about here is non-functional requirements, right? We're talking about things, extra features that the application has, right? Which is kind of, when you look at input validation, it's a good example, right? So the app might work perfectly with a happy path, right? But it might accept a whole bunch of other stuff. And the reason why this is so important is because if you show me, for example, show me that payload, right? That goes into the, what's it called? The Postman payload that goes into with the location API. So if you look at, for example, not that one, the one that you had that actually had the,
there we go. Still on my clipboard.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Oops. See why you want to test for this? This is actually, you know,
Okay, I've got some data somewhere else. 1 second.
Yeah. Cool.
There we go.
So one of the things that is very important, right, when you look at this data, right, is how far will this data go in your application? Right. So a good example is if I put a cross-script payload into one of those values, right, how far will this travel on your app?
To answer what I believe happens, to be proved, is that this travels into the database or database schema that the public-facing APIs have got access to. And there is some other process, I think user-driven, which then copies that across to the side of the app where other data is stored. So whether there's any input validation in that, I don't know. But the user loads it into the UI from the public side and then saves it into the private side.
So the reality is, right, if you think about it, and this is why, again, when we then start to look at the threat modeling of this path, right? So you can see that this is one example where you want to do a threat model or even the user journey of this data, right? So, you know, if I look at that, you know, first timestamp that gets there and that longitude and latitudes, right? Like how far that data goes into the app, right? And what is the level of trust that I have as it goes through. So let's say the worst case scenario is I can put a JavaScript payload on it, right? Or a SQL injection payload, let's say JavaScript payload, right? That gets saved into the database because, you know, it's a valid JSON call, right? It just happens to have HTML and some payloads on it. That then gets loaded, right, into the client app, the React app, right? Or of the tracer. And if you're not careful there, that could actually trigger JavaScript, right? Running on that UI.
Yes, definitely.
So you can have a situation where I put a payload in here that can travel all the way there, and then, you know, all the way further down. You know, the worst case scenario is he actually traveled all the way to the user, right? So, you know, one, and this is very important that, you know, because of the data, there's a path to it. It's very important to have a good grip on, is it even possible that occurs, right? So that's why data validation is so important at so many different layers, because, you know, when I would look at the backend app of this, I would want to make sure that the data gets saved in a very sanitized, known good state. Yeah. So that, for example, like, it doesn't mean that you're going to trust it along the way, but it means that if you now pick up any bad data along the other parts of the system, you know there's foul play happening, not in the back end, not in the from a malicious attacker, but either a vulnerability on your app or something worse, somebody manipulating databases directly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But it's very important that you follow that rabbit hole. So if you go to the code, right? So if you go to the code that handles this, if you go to the upload code, right? We can take a look at it, right?
Yeah, let's look.
So if you look at the upload code that takes that, and then the other thing, so for example, like the other thing I'm now looking for here is, are you secure by design or by accident, right? So you could actually not have a problem now just because you happen to convert those into a number, or just because you happen to, try to process it. But it doesn't mean that the next field that gets added won't have the same problem. You see what I mean? So I'm looking whether it's a systemic, consistent way to validate data, or you might just got lucky, right, from a security point of view, right? So he's not here. So you need to go. No, you need to start on the controller, right? And Petra, right? And then for the others, like when I talk about doing code reviews, this is what I mean. You start with a controller. So you start where the data enters the system, right? And you can see that if you're working with a developer, the developer knows where to find it.
Yeah, true.
Right? And that's the thing. So you can see that you start with a payload that you know is on the outside. Like I can poke that thing, I can manipulate that thing, and now you're just going to follow the rabbit hole, right? You just keep going until you're either going to hit a database or you're going to hit a user, right? So what we're looking for is the, yeah. So you. Isn't that on the controller part, on the APIs?
I'm looking here under API and I don't see the upload endpoint.
Well, then just quickly do a search for the URL, right? Is that what you're looking for, Sarah?
Yeah. No, I know. Okay, maybe it is this controller. Yeah. Okay, it's this controller, I think. Yeah, this looks like it.
Yeah, but you see, so the first thing, like one thing is like when I see something like this, I will want to reverse engineer the formula, right? So the question is, why does /upload point here? There's always a formula, right? In fact, Jonathan, like going back to that point we were just talking, right? There's always a formula, right? And the bottom line is that we know this happens because you get here, right? So there has to be a formula. There has to be a convention, either nodes or this to get there. And once you figure out that formula, you look around, right? So yeah, so go to the requests. So if you go up to the requests, so you can follow it up, right? So you got requests data to where, so you get access, so you grab the access codes and the code. So where's the data? Are you sure this is it? This is access codes, code value. Where's the actual data?
There's a service involved here as well.
Yeah. So you can see, like, so actually just go up a little bit. See what's situated this. Is that a web service that you call, or is that an internal method you're going to call that cases service?
This is called the cases controller, but it seems to also include uploads.
Yeah. But you can see that now you expect the cases service to handle any kind of case ID that is thrown to it. Whereas, and not to say that you shouldn't be able to, but the deeper you go into the code, right, the harder it is to understand what is trusted data and what's not trusted data. So one really good concept that you can try and see in the threat models is this idea of choke points. So they're points where data changes state, where data goes from untrusted to trusted. And those are the choke points that you want to make sure that you do the validation and sanitization. So validation is you check if it's okay. Sanitization is when you maybe transform it into known good because you're reasonably comfortable that you can do that, right? So what we're looking for is the place where all those location IDs and that array gets processed.
Let me go back to the search. Maybe it's not this file.
If you got the place that the app registers the various routes, that'll give you the function name normally.
Would that be like this?
Yeah, that would be like that. That is exactly what it would be
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, so I'll expect there.
So it's in these router files. So
by the way, like one way you can also do here, when you have this convention, you could also mock that method, right? If you cannot get that from Node already, you could, because you could see you're giving on a plate, right? The methods. But although I think in that case, I think if you go /upload, doesn't that give you? And you see the other thing that's interesting here is that if you had those APIs that I was describing, remember that I was talking about the APIs that follow the codes and do the testing, you will find this from it. And in fact, it's quite interesting. I have personal experience on that, where I would create APIs for UI testing and for security testing. And then when I'm developing something, I actually use those APIs to find exactly the routes, because they're already testing it from the outside in, right? They're already, in fact, there you go, right? So if you go to the testing.
Yeah, this is a test, yeah.
Yeah. So the test will start to give you that stuff, right? So yeah, so from the test, we should be able to start seeing the payload of the data as you go in, right?
Yeah, this test isn't quite following the flow that I'm following in Postman, though. It's doing something.
Yeah.
It looks like it's following a different route, which is obviously a problem. Because if you look here, I'm just calling upload with a bunch of data. And when I look for /upload, I've got these two controllers, my spec file, and a test file and a mock file.
Yeah.
This controller is not it, because it doesn't contain data upload stuff. And this one.
And Petra, right? Again, from a how it happens in the real world, right? This is exactly what happens, right? After a while, you try to find code, and even the developers who work on it sometimes can't find it. And this is him, that is actually Adam, who's actually, the code is a bit fresh. Wait until go 2 months from now, right? So, don't worry when you can't find the code, right? Because
that's okay. I don't own this code. I work on the outside of this code looking in.
Exactly. Cool. All right, so I found it. I go upload, fetch points, create points from upload. So it looks like it's that one there, uploaded points.
Yeah, I think
right?
it's
so
this.
Well, that's the access code, uploaded points. Oh, okay. Yeah, but that means, so that's interesting, right? So if you look at this, right, what this looks like is that the points are already there.
Yeah.
So
and that, it's calling this upload service, which I don't really understand. And that is this, which is fetching it from somewhere as well.
So one of the things that maybe we can do, right, as a next session on this is to actually, and this is actually something quite interesting again to help, is to create a graph of this actual sequence of events, right? And I'm a very big fan of creating thread models that represent the source code, because first of all, you find all sorts of interesting situations, right? Because you're then looking actually at what happens. So you don't represent the whole code, but what you represent is the flows. It's almost like the logical flows of what happens in the code. And the thing about that, what's interesting is that you sometimes find some very interesting blind spots, because you start to find, well, the code actually is doing this. The code allows me to do this situation, right? And the best thing of it is that it actually even helps development when you come back later and you're trying to understand how something actually works, right? I find that those guidance are much better ways to learn than sometimes reading the source code, because they capture, you know, these things.
Yeah.
So if you go back,
probably focus on first is actually just making sure that I can upload that data, and I can do it with all sorts of crazy payloads.
Yes. Yeah. So can you see that when you do this programmatically, you end up sometimes reverse engineering, right? How it works. And the other concept that is super powerful here is that you need, I know it sounds insane, right? But you need to write these payloads almost at every level of the application, right? Because what you're doing is you understanding how deep the payload goes, right? And ideally, sometimes you don't have to go very deep because you deal with it suddenly, right? But if you don't, so let me give you an example. If you go back to the previous page, so code, where you got that go back one, where you had the get point, right, from it. So you had, you get to get access codes, fetch points. No, the other one that you actually, that came after this one, the one where you actually had that one, right? So when I look at line 91, right? If I look at that line 91, what it's telling me is that I'm going to pass a code, right? And he's going to give me some codes, right? Because there's the uploaded points there, right? So so basically there's only two scenarios, right? Either the uploaded service has that object already in memory, or the first thing that the app did was persist it somewhere, right? And now you're fetching it. And now what I want to understand from a security point of view is how safe are those uploaded points?
Yeah.
And then, so then what you do is if you look at it, you go create points from upload, see that method? So that next method is really important on line 100, right?
Yeah.
Because, so can you go there, go to that guy? So now we need to think about if,
service.
and this is where it gets sometimes very tricky from a security point of view, because you can see that this method is now quite deep code, right? So you get create points, so you got uploaded points, map. So if you look at this, right? If you look at that thing there, look at line 52 and line 55, right? That doesn't look like it's validating anything, right? It's taking a point, which I grabbed from records, right? So I'm going for every pointed group, and all I'm doing is the point coordinates, I'm assuming is the name, is the pair, is now inserted into the coordinates object here.
Yeah, the latitude and longitude, yeah.
Yeah, so, but now if you go back to your postman, right? The question I have now from a security point of view, is that one of these values there, latitude and longitude? And if you now put, you know, anything on it, so if what happens if you put a JavaScript payload? What happens if you put, you know, a huge string on it, right? What happens if you put character 0? What happens if you put all sorts of stuff? Does it go through?
Let's find out. Yes, goes through the 201.
All right, now put some strings on it. Right? And now see why you want to run this in a for loop?
Yeah.
Because all those clicks you're doing now don't scale, right? And the worst part, right? The worst part here is that you just did a security test, right? That is not captured anywhere.
Yeah.
So even if this, for example, had failed, right? And you go, woohoo, right? It didn't work, right? But the test is not captured anywhere. So if tomorrow, right, this suddenly passes, where is the flick? So you have, and then this is where it goes, when you go back to the Asvs and the OWASP kind of security standards, there has to be a connection between what you just did right now and the requirement over there. And if there isn't, you don't, yeah.
So what I learned there is that it is presumably sanitizing that it is a number, presumably a floating point number.
Oh, sorry, it didn't work. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, you got a 400.
Yeah. Yeah, but make it smaller. Just change it to AAA. No, the whole thing.
Oh, the whole thing?
Yeah, the whole thing to AAA.
Actually, what about if I put it in quotes?
Oh yeah, it wasn't in quotes. Then yeah,
No.
you didn't even hit.
Didn't pass the
Yes,
JSON
sir.
validation, yeah. Well, that's got a 500. It's more interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and you see, so what's cool about this is now we are reverse engineering, right? The back end functionality, right? So we start to understand. Okay.
There's a SQL error.
All right. Oh, okay. That's kind of okay. That's a bit more worrying. What's the error that you got? So error insert into there. What error do you got? Scroll down. Now you need to go all the way to the end because you got all the stuff, right?
Yeah.
What does it say at the end?
There we go. Error missing column.
No. That's column AAA does not exist. Ooh, that's weird.
That's
Right,
promising.
so yes.
Technology-wise, what's the data source you're pushing this to?
So what's the
MySQL? Yeah,
I think this is actually in this reference environment. I think it's actually running Postgres.
Okay. So that would imply, well, so if you got one, assumes you got SQL in there, and somehow the SQL as the input has ended up within the SQL as a column name. That would be my reading of that, which is probably not good.
Can you put a single quote and a quote in that request, please?
Just go the whole way. You know, just nickname yourself Bobby Tables with a drop.
Yeah.
Tables.
So if you go, okay. So the one you want to put is AAA, right? No. I wouldn't go that far yet. So the payload I like, right, is AAA, right? And then single quotes, double quotes. You need to escape the double quotes on this one, right? No, you need to escape the double quotes. So if you go / double quotes, that should work.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so the single quote is fine. The double quote, yeah. So take, no, just one double quote is fine, and then put BBB after that, BBB, and then actually while you're there, just put an H1 HTML tag. Yeah, and then CCC. So this is one of my favorite kind of, and then just the end quote. You need to end quote. So even when you're putting payloads, right, that simple little thing already usually tests against SQL injection, HTML injection, attribute injection, right? And it's kind of a little thing. Probably this one you don't need the whole thing, but for that one, it's a good one to just run. And then what we're looking for is what kind of error you're going to get in this case, right? Right? So insert into points. Well, actually, you can I say it at the top. Okay. Okay. So the good news, right? That's good news, right? Is that it looks like you escaped, right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing, which is, although show me to the top. Just search for AAA on that guy, right? Just search for AAA on the response because we should be able to see it.
Yeah.
Right? Where is it? Yeah, so can you see what's happening there, right? So you can see that the guy's escaping. So this already feels really close to comfort, right? Because you get, you can see where the thing is being inserted.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is definitely one of those that it's worth investigating, right? To see where it is, right? Because there's definitely it's a bit weird why in this case we actually are affecting column names, right?
Yeah, I think clearly the snippet validation and some better error message is needed.
And the other thing that I would say that already feels worrying is if you're going to generate queries like the way you have there, I bet with you that if I send, 100 times that amount of traffic, you're going to start to hit performance. You can start to hit performance problems, right? That doesn't seem to me a very scalable way of writing queries to a database.
So we got anything else weaponized I can try here?
So a good one to put is character 0. And so the other, that you have there, and can you try 2 backlashes in a row, right?
Escapes.
Yeah, so you escape backlash, right? So if you just delete AAA, or you can leave that there, right? So you want a normal one, yeah, and then go backslash. So backslash, right? And then do another one, right? Yeah, same thing, yeah. And no, I think you need to put one more. Just put one more, and then just put %2f.
Right.
I think it's 2f. Can't remember. And
that's
go.
Escaped, right?
Yes, that's escaped. And yeah, run that guy. So one of the things that we do here, right? And this is why, look, when you get to this point, you actually need to run a mini fuzzer on this thing, because you need to understand the kind of characters that are flying. So what you really want is you want to now extract just a method that gives you that error, right? So what you want is, see, that's interesting. You got 4 there. Can you do this? Can you go again, another payload? Can you try,
yeah.
Right? 2 backlashes, right? 3 backlashes and a quote. 3, one more. And then a quote. And then AAA, close brackets, right? Comma, BBB. So what I'm trying, look, see what I'm trying to do here, just to explain, right? My thinking, right, is you put 4, so it's important to see where the escape is happening, right? JSON should have not escaped the backslash, right? Or it might do, right? So I want to double check, right? If that guy is actually being escaped or not, right? So I want to see if I actually have an escape character or not. And the other thing to try here is, okay, show me the error. Show me the error at the bottom now. Okay. So what I was basically now trying to play with is the escape. Can you break out of the escape of the quote?
Yeah.
And this is the kind of stuff that is almost now worth looking at the actual database and see if there's vulnerabilities. Because, for example, SQL Server had a vulnerability that if you sent enough backlashes, there was actually a moment where we'd lose one. Literally, sounds insane, but it would. And at that moment in time, you put a quote, and then you're out of it. Yeah. So you can see that you are 1 quote away from being outside the SQL injection, right? Because the thing about this, the other worrying is that this is not using parameterized queries, right? Because you really, you don't want your data to end in the middle of a SQL string. Yeah, so the reality is that by design, this is already not using parameterized queries because, you actually take data from the user and you slap it in the middle of a SQL string, right? Which is crazy dangerous. And by the way, like a SQL injection from here, it's pretty bad, right? Because this will allow
public endpoint.
This is a public endpoint, right? With the ability to insert data into the database, right? So and you can see this is why it's interesting. Like the more data minimization you do, and the more the idea of encrypting data and doing that kind of stuff, the less sometimes this becomes problematic because you're reducing the amount of things that exist in one moment in time, right? Now, if you go back to the testing, you need a way to run these tests programmatically, because we now need to reverse engineer every single character that is possible and every single kind of thing that is actually possible in that sequence of events, right? And that's why it's so important to do it in tests like this, because we can now be specific. Now I want to replicate it in a test, not in in that environment. But then what you do, right, is you write the same test all the way to the database. In fact, what I want to do in this case is I would actually replicate the same exploits as close as possible to the database, because by then I'm not proving the path. I know I'll get there. So you can see that the payload travels through everything to the database. In fact, what is that showing is that you're not validating the data at all, right? So in fact, remember the original hypothesis was, where does the payload end? At the moment, the payload is actually ending in the database. And the only reason it got blocked was actually because you actually were doing something a bit more weird, which is you're actually using it to slap into a field, right? Well, an endpoint, which might be that you want to just add a count to it. Maybe that's the pattern, right? But it's already a weird one that you're already using that as a key and a value in the database, in that particular scenario. But you can see that what you want to do now is write tests. So as each layer goes by, right, you confirming that is possible, right? And you're confirming that the payload is still traveling. Because if you go back to the previous source code situation, right, when we're looking at get points, like that one, we now confirmed that those points that you had there, access codes, no, the one below, the line 91, that line 91 is now malicious.
Yeah.
Right? And that means that when you go create points from uploads, like you said, that method is not doing any validation. It's just normalizing into a better JSON. And then you're going to call concern.
Yeah, you also saw in the code that the only validation on the timestamp was that it's a valid timestamp. And if this stuff gets loaded into a UI, which is trying to build duration filters and things like that, trying to compute duration, I can see some attacks there as well.
Exactly, right? But if you look at the big power here is to start with a set of requirements and then connect them to the tests, right? And that's the sweet spot, right? And can you open up that that deck I just showed? Because again, a little bit. So that that last link I put in, that Google Docs. But this is something that Mario presented today, which is really, really cool. And by the way, for the guys on the call, if you haven't seen this one, it's really, really cool presentation. So can you see that what he's doing is trying to create user stories from Asvs, right? So you could see that, go down, you see, he took the domains of Asvs and then start taking the user stories, which is, as a user, I want to do this, right? And then if you keep going down, you're going to see some cool examples, right? See, look, as a type of user, I want to do this. As a security engineer, I want to allow only safe character. There you go, like perfect one, right? there's one we could use right now, right? So there's a requirement, right? And then you start to codify what that means, right? And then eventually you start to hit test. And look, there you go, right? So there's, for example, the headers allow certain headers. So there's the requirement for ASVS. And by the way, there's a push at OWASP to help this out, right? So from your point of view, you should also turn to the OWASP community and going, oi, don't give me a document, give me tests, right? So I think we're at that level where you can really help is to say, come on, guys, hey, this doesn't scale, right? I need better tests for this. And the community, I think, will respond.
What I need to do is to get the happy path test working.
Yes.
And get some of that infrastructure in place that we talked about earlier so that people can come and help more easily.
Yes. And that's why, look, my big lesson for here was that the biggest gap in introducing security testing is nothing to do with security, is nothing to do that you want to do it or the CISO wants to do it or not, is that your test infrastructure is not solid enough or feature rich enough to allow those tests to be inserted easily. And the problem with this is that a lot of the times you want better tests, but you or the team that does this want better tests, but because you can get away with it without having the tests, it just keeps falling off the priority, right? What we have to say is that we want to, for example, validate that exploit is not possible. My argument would be, without tests, you can't confirm that. So you raise the bar to say, without a good suite of tests, without a good suite of test infrastructure, you are not able to confirm to me that you fix that problem effectively, right? And that's what you want. So you want to be able to say, we don't have SQL injection, and here's the proof, right? We don't have param validation, and here's the proof. Not today, not because me and you spend, or a bunch of other security persons spend a week researching and going through all the code, but because we have proof that it's today, it's tomorrow, the week after, next month, right? Or after you delegated that to somebody else and somebody starts using this, your biggest, think about it. When we talked about the idea that you want to control the security and the labels, right? This has to connect to the labels, right? When somebody starts to fiddle with the app, one of the biggest things you want to control is show me the end result of the unit tests or the integration tests or the security tests. You know how much they mocked about with the back end. Does that make sense?
Music to my ears.
Yeah, but this is really cool, right? Because my biggest frustration is I've done so many times this, but I can never publish it. So I love the fact that I can actually work and help with this. And something, again, is personally relevant, but it's exactly the kind of thing we need to be doing from a security point of view, right? So this is really cool.
Would you normally use something like in Python, it's like unit test, right? Or JUnit in Java or NUnit? You normally use something like that, right? Yeah. So you want to create a suite of unit tests that replicate the happy paths, right? And then actually, if you want in Python, is this code public? Let me just double check. I wrote something a month ago that might be a good example where we are. Let me just trust. This is code that we're about to open source. I'm not sure if it's open source just yet, but VP QA. All right, let me just quickly share my screen. I'll show you something I created. API. Okay, cool. So what this is, just give me a second. So this is actually an API that we wrote when we were refactoring. So when we were refactoring an app that we were launching as a product, and the thing that I was quite strong about was that let's not start changing the backend until we have the happy paths, right? So this is actually in Python. So can you see my screen? Yeah, all clear.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So what this is a REST API that is hitting a live server that starts with some helper methods, right? Okay, get, put, posts, replicate it, everything, right? But the really cool thing is that it now has a method for each one of the functionalities of the application. So you could see that, a wrapping, file delete, file downloads, file uploads, file sanitized, files quarantine. And what this is okay, that's a get, that's a post, that's a get, etc. And what this is basically is it is actually confirming the URLs, right? So this, and then what you do is you write a unit test that consumes that. So you could see, right, that when I get to the test, I'm literally just invoking that API that got created. So look here, so test authentication, grab the user, right? Then check the response 1, check response 2. So you can see that I've abstracted the logic, and I'm just basically now using the API functionality so I can then add the use cases for this, right? So for example, to do the thing. So if you want to upload a file, want to release files and stuff like that. So basically the point of this is, I see there's a good example, okay, I'm inserting a tag. So you do the bits, right? and then you confirm that it behaves as you expect. But if you look at here, right, when I call that, I don't care about what happens in the REST calls. I just know that I give you a file name and the payloads, and then I hit on the other side, right? And actually, if I show you, sorry, does that make sense?
It makes sense. Separation of concerns, right, between the details of the application and the logic, the flow.
Yeah, and then what you do here, right, is if you look at what's it called, the main. So I have a really cool example in Nodes here. So when we got our client API, we got some really cool security tests, right? That then what they do is they confirm the functionality, right, of the backend, right? So what you then have is you have tests that actually go and hit the backend, and this is where sometimes you have to change the way you code to make it better, right? So this is a very big important concept, that sometimes the way to do this is to actually change the way the code is actually implemented, right, to make it easier to test, right? And that's very important. So you see here, we've made it very explicit where is every single endpoint, right? So the point here is there should be no URL created anywhere on the application that doesn't go to here, because this is our master kind of situation, right? And then we basically implemented, I'm just trying to find the security tests, because it actually works, it actually came out quite well, where we also whitelist. Yeah, so here, for example, what you have is we whitelisted what you can do anonymously, what you need, what a user can do, and what an admin can do, right? And it's interesting because you can see here that we actually need to delete this. This is a remains of one of the variations of the authentication, in my view, was done incorrectly because it was failed open. So we basically go, if is this, is this that, is this super admin? If it doesn't, you will let it go. And the logic is no, right? We want a whitelist so that what this also means, it means that any route that you add that is not here, you need super admin privilege. So again, you could see from a design point of view, we went from, if the app wasn't explicitly mapped, you could access it, which means that you can shoot yourself in the foot straight away, to actually, if it's not there, right? And then actually simplify the code, right? Like if you look at this code here, you can now process this, you can test it. In fact, we have a unit test that actually hard codes again those checks, because I want to make sure that none of those things have other behaviors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. Love it.
So you could see that, when there's a moment where you actually also have to change the code, right, to make it easy for your test. But that's okay, right? It's actually, I think that you should never be shy of that, because the more clean your code is, the simpler it is, the less moving parts it is, right? In a way, the more secure you can make it and the less bugs you will have. So security tends to drive a lot of those changes. And I think, that's healthy, because we ask hard questions as, give me your URLs, give me your data points, give me the workflows. You start to drive payloads in places that sometimes the happy path doesn't get to it, unless there's a blind spot.
Cool.
So this is good. So I think we have a nice place to collaborate, right? So I think, I guess the interesting question is, do you want to make that as part of, you're going to put that as part of the main code base, right? Or do you want to create a separate project just for security tests?
No, I think we've got all our tests in there at the moment. We've got a few scripts dotted around. What I'll do, I'll work on the happy path and check that in. And then, I don't know, I guess I'll put the link somewhere on Slack.
Yes, do. And I also do a bit of coding. So, I'll try to chip in and help with that. That's how I keep technical. That's the way I relax is write a bit of code. So I'll try to be a contributor.
Quick question. What are you using currently for your build environment? So what does your CI/CD pipeline look like? Just there was a.
It's somewhere between GitHub and Google Cloud.
Okay.
At the moment, I haven't delved into it. I know it's doing lots of Dockerization. I don't know what it is under the hood. It's not Jenkins.
Okay. There was a there was a session earlier talking about security testing in the CI/CD pipeline, and one of the things from that was looking for example applications to play with and work with and do it on. And one of Dinis's suggestions was this one. Dinis, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder.
No, it's exactly, man. That's
yeah.
No, that'd be great.
Cool. I will also again have a look on Slack and stuff. I just for comedy, I actually left work at the end of the year to do a whole bunch of sailing and traveling, and then COVID-19 put pay to that pretty quickly. So I have a bit more free time than I anticipated at the the moment.
That means
So
you
maybe
have
it will help.
time, man. Perfect.
I
We
do.
could definitely get something going with our DevOps team and like getting Sonar or whatever the recommended tool is up and running.
So
Yeah.
Daniel, these guys are perfect, right? Because if you think about
Yeah.
it, like that idea of writing small little, and look, GitHub Actions is perfect for this, right? Because although the pipeline might be in other places, GitHub Actions is the perfect place to write them first, because it's close to the repo, it goes there, it's fast, it runs with all the commits, right? And then whatever works there, we can make it work bigger, right?
Yep. And one of the things from my previous place and before is making sure that the test is the quickest and the most appropriate. So, is testing for X best at check-in? Is testing for X better on the runtime? Try optimizing the amount, because one of our who's Marius's business partner's been doing the Sec DevOps presentations. Sorry, his name escapes me. He was talking about.
Is that Mohammed, right?
Yeah. He was talking about minimizing the time impact on the pipeline, ensuring that you don't fail the build or don't block the build, et cetera, all which are very important factors when working with engineering teams that want to move quickly.
Yeah.
So cool. So let me just quickly show something, because we're running out of time. And I had a couple of little things prepared. It's not very polished, but it kind of, and we can probably, continue this, right? Because I feel in a good stride now, Adam, and I don't want us to lose momentum on this, right? So let's continue, right, after this. So I kind of was thinking that there's a number of OWASP projects that are worth looking at. And maybe can I just get you to comment quickly if you heard or if you guys using. So you guys using Zap at the moment?
I haven't used it yet on this project, but I've used it before.
Yeah. So Zap is like, if you have already that environment that you can spin up, right? Then we should be able to run Zap on top of it, right? Because we can create an environment to destroy. That's cool. But if you look at this one, in fact, how you guys tracking dependencies? You're just using the GitHub normal one, or you have Snake or something else?
We don't have Snake. We're just using the normal GitHub stuff and a little bit of Yarn audit.
Yeah. So this is not a bad project, right? That has that. Right. Cool. So the top 10 I think is one that it will be worthwhile.
Yeah.
Almost to try to think about how for each one of those we can start to write proofs for it. And in fact, we talk about injection, but there's a bunch of others, right? So and actually the other question I was going to ask you is that, because you have a distributed team of developers, is it worthwhile starting to think about awareness training for them? So if you think about it, like, we could run some of these sessions where you invite your devs, right? You guys say, hey, we're going to have an OWASP top 10 training. We're going to have that kind of training. Is that something that we could be doable?
Yeah, that might be doable as well. Yeah, I think that would be good to raise awareness of the OWASP stuff with the engineers. Yeah.
Because you got, like I said, you have a distributed team of developers, right? Around the world, which is basically, real world stuff, right? So I think it'll be a good, and this is the kind of stuff that we can try to find, you know, up and coming security professionals, you know, somebody with a bit of time, Jonathan, that kind of,
that cough you got there, Dinis.
you know, somebody who can actually, you know, deliver this. But I feel that, again, we can record it and it could be an asset. But I like the fact that, you know, we can look at your 100 or, you know, maybe one day 500 developers, right, as almost, you know, a good example of the kind of community that OWASP materials should be reaching out, right, and delivering, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And so this is a good example of, do you know this project, Defect Dojo?
No, I don't know this one.
So this is a cool project who's kind of, he looks at aggregating vulnerabilities. So he aggregates vulnerabilities discovered, and you're going to need this or something like this once you start running multiple tools, right? And you start to get that nice pile of findings and vulnerabilities, right? And you need a way to manage and make sense out of that. So this is a nice open source project that might be able to help there.
Great, so we've got these all written down.
Yeah, and then the testing guide. So this is the brother or the uncle, right? Or the mobile testing guides, which you used, which is kind of a bit older, but is being refreshed really nicely. And that's more for the web security side of things. Because I know you guys referenced the mobile testing guides. Did you look at this one?
Yes, it had gaps in though, particularly around things like JWT. That was the only experience I had looking at it so far. So I'm planning to revisit it for my input validation.
JWT is a minefield.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the contribution that we can give to this and the other ones is to, you know, start to go to the community here and saying, look, we're trying to test this thing. So instead of, you know, almost going the ASVS and the mobile testing guide, right, which you got already done a bit of the mappings, I think we can start to look at this and going, this also needs tests, right? This needs independent, those one-off little tests that check for one thing really well, right? So cool. The Sam, did you look at the software assurance maturity model?
No, not yet. You mentioned it yesterday.
Yeah. So the advantage of this guy is again, I think, but this is again something that I would, you know, we'll probably nudge them to go, can you guys help us with this, right? Sorry, let me just open up this so you can see what it is. I don't think I'm sharing the right screen. Just give me a second. So what you get with this is a really good measurement of this sort of like top level, you know, areas from governance. So you could see, like, you know, talks about the governance and the policies and the compliance, then the design, you know, do you do this stuff? So it's actually a level above ASVS, right? But I think what's interesting is to actually take this, and this is something that I don't think you should have the overhead. I think the community should help to create a version of this that is tied to your use case, right? Because this is everybody that's implemented these, at least the ones I know and the ones that I've done. That's what we do, right? We take a bunch of these and we go, what is relevant to the app on the other side? But the nice thing of this is that you start to think of, there's a maturity level. So you look at it. So build process. Is it formally described? Is it automated? Do you do security checks, right? So you can see that there's a maturity level that you're not going to do level 3 until you do level 1. And the nice of this is also allows you to have this maturity to say, look, we're level 1 today. We want to be level 2 before launch. We want level X. So this is another way of even the labels to kind of think about it. And it has really great set of settings from, you can see you got governance, design, verification. I think the last one is operations. So those are the kind of big sort of 4 things that are important. And in some of your cases, for example, you're saying we don't do, but that's important because you probably want the parties at the other side to do these things, right? So you might say, do you respond to detected incidents, have a repeatable process and have a dedicated resource, right, to do this, right? And my answer to this is, if you have playbooks, that's what you want them for, right? But you might turn around and say, we don't do this, but we expect the health authority to do it.
We have to do it around the mobile app, right? Because we're managing the mobile app, but the healthcare authority manages their side.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. But so you can see that this maturity model, and there's a really great community around this, is one level above the ASVS. So ASVS is very on the code, is very on the kind of what's happening in the real world. A lot of this is about your setup, your infrastructure, you would feed into this, right? So cool. I think that's a really good project for you guys to be involved. And where is my slide? There's just a couple more that I want to just cover. And where are we? Oh yeah, here we go. And by the way, I used the, just for everybody reference.
Are you sharing screen?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I'm screening my share now. Yeah, I got this from the session. So if you go to the sessions, to the COVID sessions, and you go to the session that we are right now, the slides are here. So that's the ones I'm using. So cool. Just there's a couple more just to cover. Yeah. So the juice shop, I actually think that the reason I ask you that question about the developers, right? Because the juice shop is a Node.js application, right? Which has tons of vulnerabilities, but it feels very, very real. So I think it's a great one to do a hackathon session with the developers, because there's also a capture the flag. There's actually a way to now run this almost in capture the flag mode. So that the idea of doing some session with your developers, this is a perfect one to do a bit of hacking in there. And this is a Node.js application, right? So when you look at some of the vulnerabilities, you can actually see how they got implemented. So that's a cool one.
Cool.
So this is another one where there's a really good set of frameworks, right? And there's a really good where is it? Online, yeah. So this is a really cool other project that I feel that we can leverage, because what these guys have started to do is start to take another level of or actually start to implement those checklists, right? Actually web apps, right? So see again, like architecture, design, descriptions, and this kind of flows. And what I like about this is again, it takes it to something that is a bit more consumable, but I feel that we need to customize this guidance to exactly what makes sense to your crew and developers.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And I think, being cheeky, that's almost where you have to position you from an OWASP community point of view, right? So what I want to go to OWASP community and say, Adam doesn't have the time to filter this out. So it's our job, if we want to create guidance that is usable by Adam and the 10 developers that work with him, or the other 50 that are over there, we have to customize this so that is relevant to your stuff. So for example, that guidance, that bug we just found should be in your guidance. So when you talk about data validation, we show a real example from the COVID app, from a past version that basically was using, values as keys, which is the kind of stuff that if we put it here, nobody would believe that you would do that, right? I mean, it's the kind of stuff that, it's very easy to go, oh, we would never do that. And you go, actually, somebody did it, and there was a very good reason for it, and it made sense, but, it's a bit dangerous. Do you know what I mean? So it's really cool. So that's a really good one. And then I think the next one, is, I think that's it. Yep, cool. Yeah, and I think the next steps is let's continue to collaborate, right? And maybe aim to do a couple of sessions in a couple of months from now, right? And but meanwhile, let's see if we can generate some energy and actually continue working on that test framework, which I think is a really sweet spot for us at the moment.
Yeah, great. No, looking forward to it. I think from a test framework point of view, I think that's where we can move forward on pretty quickly. I think getting some sessions in the diary in a couple of months is a good idea as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do have to do a bit of, heavy work next couple of weeks, right? Because I've been just doing Summit
yeah, me too.
non-stop. Yeah. But Jonathan, you got time, right?
Yep.
So there you go. And but also, like, Petra and Abbas, right? Like, I actually view that it's very important that we also participate, right, at Glasswall, at some open source projects. And I think this is a perfect one, because I think you guys are going to learn a lot, and I think it's a great project to be involved. So from my point of view, you got my support.
Thank you. Absolutely. This was a big learning curve. This is amazing today, and I'm looking forward for more sessions like this.
It's a deep dive in AppSec. Yeah, it's great.
Oh, cool. Right. I think we can call it a day. I think you can stop recording.
Yes. You don't want to do recap, Dinis?
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. Actually, Adam, do you want to do a recap? Go on, you can do it.
Okay. On the whole week.
Yeah.
Actually, that would be great. Actually, yeah, I think,
So yeah. So where do we start? We started off.
Another one.
So here you are. Go.
So what did we do? We did 3 sessions on threat modeling. So we started off.
Actually, sorry. Wait. Stop. Sorry. Can you start again? And just to be fair, just actually let me do a quick intro since we do the thing.
Okay, cool.
And then just say, you from Adam, you from COVID Safe Path. Hi. So at the summit, we were looking to find a really interesting application that we can collaborate with. And when we start to look at COVID apps, one of the areas we were trying to reach out was an open source, privacy first, COVID tracing application that we can collaborate with. And the great news is that we found one. It's the COVID Safe Path apps. And we end up having 6 sessions around it. I think we're quite successful sessions. And here's Adam from the Safe Path app team, who's going to talk about a little about his experience and what happened at the summit, and why you should go back and see the videos that we published.
Sure. So I'm now just into my 11th hour of talking about this app with various parts of the tracks from the Security Summit. I think we spent the first 6 hours talking about threat modeling and really understanding all the different ways that our application could be used, misused, coming up with some great architectural ideas about how we can mitigate some of the risks from different types of actors. And I think we then spent 2 hours yesterday on, 2.5 hours on security labels and talking about how the current state of the app versus the ideal that we wanted to end up in, how we can communicate that in a taxonomy, in a label that is easily consumable. So that's been really useful in terms of thinking about our communications. And then today we spent 2 hours talking about automated testing, talking about mapping BDD down to security test cases, really helping me understand what security professionals need to get started, the happy path test. We've done some live stuff in various tools, and I think we certainly found a few vulnerabilities, even if we didn't manage to exploit the app in the end. But this has been fantastic, and I've got a really clear view about how we can move forward with security and work best with security professional volunteers.
Brilliant, and and thanks for your time, and I really hope you guys are very successful, because I think we need the app, and it's looking good, and it can really make a difference in the world. So let's make it happen.
Well, thanks for inviting us. It's been great.
Good stuff. All right.